Hello everyone and welcome to the third part of how we plan to implement this simple task system. In this video we're going to go ahead and create our first example objective. So let's go ahead and create a new C# file. We're going to call it task complete objective. And if the name doesn't imply enough, we're going to be determining whether or not the task is complete. So I'm going to go ahead and copy all of this just to keep the namespace information and stuff like that. So I don't have to type it out again. Really is pretty much my issue. And we're going to change this name to task complete objective. And it's going to inherit from task.objective. Okay, get rid of the using statements we don't need. And implement the abstract method or methods. Okay, and then the other, okay, so we need the add and remove listeners methods, but before we do that, let's go ahead and define a variable which is going to be of the type task. It's going to reference a task called task, that's our variable name, and then we're needing the constructor task complete objective, which is going to take a type task called task, and we're going to set the variable, the instance variable. Okay, so now we need to go to task real quick before we can add listeners, because we don't actually have an event being fired. So underneath the abstract class we're going to say public event system.action, which if you're unfamiliar with system.action, you see that it is a delegate of the void, or of the type void, which is nothing. It doesn't have any return type, and it has no parameters. So let's go ahead and look at, or we're going to go ahead and use that. So basically, you should really look up the delegates and events, but basically an event will fire off. So we're going to call this completed first off. Let's go and do that. So the completed event here will be fired off once, you know, this in the update method where we determine that the task is complete. It will fire this completed event if something is listening to it, and that's really what the add and remove listeners do. Is it adds a method to listen for the completed event to be fired, but it's going to have, or the method that listens to it is going to have the same signature as the system.actions, which means that it's going to need both a void return type and no parameters, is what this is, you know, basically stating. We could create our own delegate for task event handling, but there's no point since we're only have one event that's actually being fired from the task, and we have this generic version of a delegate already provided to us by the system namespace. Okay, so we need a method down below called, it's going to be void first off, and it's going to be called notify on completed. Basically what this is going to do is to prevent us from ever having to type this multiple times, but it's going to say is if completed, completed does not equal null. So we never set it to equal anything, never really set it to equal anything, but we will when we add a listener, and we'll see the syntax for that later. When we have a method listening for this event, it's considered not null. But when nothing's listening for it, it is considered null. So it's like a collection of delegates or collection of methods, and that's really what it is. It's just a collection. And once it would be null if the collection was empty. Okay, so if it does not equal null, we can actually fire the event, and we do that by calling it like it's a method. And if this was, so you see that it says system.action task.completed, so that's saying that it's of the type system.action, which is, again, a delegate, which is essentially a anonymous method. So if the delegate required any parameters, we would pass them in here, but since it doesn't, we're not passing any parameters. Okay, so if completed does not equal null, fire the completed event. So nothing is listening to it right now. But what we're going to do is say if mTask does not equal null. So if task is in fact, assigned to this objective, we're going to say mTask dot completed plus equals, and then it generates a possible name for the method to be called. I'm not going to call it that. I'm going to call it onTaskCompleted. And then I'm going to move this down to the bottom, just because that's how I like it. Okay, so this right here is the syntax for adding this method here, which has a void return type and no parameters, just like the system.action delegate. But we're adding this method to the event, which is like adding it to a collection of other methods by doing this plus equals, which means add to the existing thing. Okay. And then remove listeners is going to be the exact same thing, but it's going to have a minus sign. Okay. And then now we need to do event handling. Well, what are we going to do once we know that the task is completed? Well, because of the task.objective, we have a reference to the parent. So since we have a reference to the parent, we're going to say m.taskUpdate. But update is going to call, let's see, we go here. I already know what it's going to do, but I'm gonna just show you real quick. So it's going to call check complete. Well, check complete will run through all the objectives, and if is complete is set to false, it's going to return false. Well, we want it to return true. So, oh yeah, well that makes sense. We need to set is complete to true before the update. So, let's see, is complete equals true. Okay. Yeah, so it has a public setter, so that should work perfectly fine. So we're setting this to equal true and then updating the task. So if this is the only objective on the task, then the only objective is set to true as soon as the task that we're associating it with, it becomes complete. So never set the task that we're waiting to become complete equal to the task that this objective is assigned to, because it will never work. There's a little helpful hint for you. Okay, so this objective really can't be tested because we need a task to become complete first. And seeing as we don't have... You know what? Actually, we can test this. How much time do we have? We can test it, but we're going to actually wait. So in the next video, we'll go ahead and create another one, another objective type that's going to be listening to key input.